Good evening, everybody. Sorry for being a few minutes late. I'm Chief Constable Mark Neufeld of the Calgary Police Service. Thanks for coming out and joining us here tonight. I'm here to update you on the violence that occurred on Saturday afternoon in the northeast community of Falconridge. We, we believe that the situation is linked to ongoing conflict involving some members of the Eritrean community and is related to similar events we've seen transpire around the world, across Canada, and right here in Alberta. It's important to know that our service is not taking sides in relation to the underlying conflict. We've been in talks with the community, and there are strong feelings on both sides of the issue. It's also important to know that there are individuals and families who simply wanted to attend a cultural event and had no intention of bothering anybody else and did not want to be bothered themselves. The point is that all groups have the right to gather and to assemble, and as soon as opposing groups set out to disrupt those events, and especially if they do that with violence or threats of property damage, that results in the laws being broken. That was the case on Saturday afternoon. This clash was centered around two separate events scheduled in the city's northeast quadrant. The scheduled events were peaceful in nature, and all attendees are not to be blamed for the violence that transpired alongside them. I want to be very clear. The clash was not a protest. This was a planned, targeted attack made by some members of the involved communities. This is really the largest violent event to happen in our city in recent memory, if you think about the numbers of people that were involved in this. We are actively investigating this incident, and we will hold those responsible for the criminal activity that took place there. We have dedicated resources working on the investigation to carry out the investigation. With approximately 150 individuals believed to be involved, it'll take some time to finish the investigation, as we'll need to do our due diligence and review all of the available evidence. At this point, we're asking members of both the media and the public to share any information that they have available. That would include photos, videos, social media posts, CCTV footage, or anything else they may have captured in that area. In the coming days and weeks, we will also be asking members of the community to help to identify and locate persons of interest and people that we believe were involved in some of these crimes. Some have asked if we knew or if we were aware that this could happen. The answer to that is yes. The Calgary Police Service has very strong relationships with all of the communities, including the Eritrean community. Our members knew of the scheduled events in the area and also knew there was potential for violence based on the previous conflicts in Israel, Toronto, and in Edmonton in August. We worked directly with the event organizers prior to the events to ensure safety for the community and to try to ease tensions between the involved groups. Once violence did break out, we were on scene very quickly and able to separate the combatants and quickly restore public order. CPS members on the scene showed exactly why we train for situations like this. Their actions brought the violence to a quick end, prevented further escalation, further injury, and further property damage. We're continuing to monitor this situation, and we have an open dialogue, as I said, with the involved groups. We do not anticipate any further violence. However, rest assured, we will respond accordingly if it does. In situations like this, we often think about outcomes of the events, but we don't look at the victims themselves. In this instance, victims aren't just individuals who were taken to the hospital because of the violence, but they're local business owners. They're people that live in nearby communities. They're kids in the community. And there are people who were not involved and had nothing to do with the situation. We recognize the frustration and the fear that this brings to nearby communities, and we share that frustration. The majority of the property that was damaged belonged to people who had nothing to do with this conflict. They were individuals who owned cars that were parked in the area, and there were local businesses, small businesses, that had very little, probably not very well positioned to absorb losses like this over something so stupid. We are currently in contact with a number of victims to assess the full extent of this damage. We'll continue to work with the community members across Calgary. Our diversity relations team or resource team works to build relationships between the service and our diverse communities throughout the city. That's always very helpful at times like this. They're actively engaging members of identified groups to maintain that open dialogue and further the investigative efforts. As police, our main goal is to keep Calgary safe and to hold those who commit criminal acts accountable, and we will do that. I want to take the time to thank the victims and the members of the public who've come forward to provide information and cooperate thus far in the investigations. That is extremely helpful. I also want to thank members of the service who responded, who were met with disrespect and a total disregard for any authority in any direction that they gave. Your courage and professionalism in the face of a very real prospect of bodily harm shows your ongoing dedication to the protection of our city. I also want to thank our partner agencies, including local EMS and the Calgary Fire Department, for their valuable assistance on the weekend. With that, I'll stop and I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Chief, to be careful with the words around this calling it violence, conflict, and clash. Would this essentially be a riot? That was on Saturday?
It could be characterized as a riot, but at the end of the day, I think it's fine just to say that it was a senseless violence that was sort of planned and premeditated, and there were individuals who wanted this to happen, and it did.
We saw on Saturday Superintendent Ryan say that members from CPS were targeted and assaulted during this. How dangerous is that to have that happen in the city?
Well, I think it's always dangerous where you get in a situation where you see individuals armed with weapons, sticks and pipes, and throwing rocks and bottles. I can tell you, I've watched a number of videos today from officers who were at that scene, and it was very dangerous. The first officers who arrived on scene there were not equipped with shields and helmets and this type of thing, and individuals who were participating in the conflict had helmets and shields, and so obviously we're prepared for the conflict. And so there were rocks and bottles and other projectiles flying around. Very, very dangerous for all involved, which is why a dozen people ended up in the hospital.
Chief, you talked about how your people talk to the community leaders. What did they tell the community leaders? Because obviously what happened is not what they probably promised you would not happen. And why wasn't there that level of, let's say, preparation or level where you were ready for a possible riot?
Well, I think we were ready for whatever came, Rick. The reality of it is, I think what we learn is that the communities are not completely homogenous or completely together on things. So you've got different factions in the community, and frankly, you've got small minorities of the community. And this is why I say not everybody is to be blamed for the actions of the few. There's a small number of people who I believe wanted a conflict to happen, and regardless of what elders and others said in the community, it appears that it was going to happen, as it did in Edmonton and as it did in Toronto. And we were prepared. We were immediately on top of it and put a stop to it very quickly.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is if they don't have that authority, you seem to be saying moral authority, to give you a commitment that this won't get out of hand, because this wasn't just people losing their temper at a protest. That happens, and we've dealt with that many times in many protests. If they don't have that moral suasion to do that, moral authority to do that, then what's the point? If you talk to them and say, look, don't cross the red line, don't do this, have a peaceful protest, don't get nasty, and all of a sudden 150 people from their community show up with weapons and are having a riot.
Yeah.
I mean, do you go back to them now and say, like, what happened, folks?
Oh, we've done that today. Make no mistake. We've gone back to the community today. I think the underlying issues that sort of drive this are very complicated, and there's very strong feelings on both sides of it, as you might expect. But at the end of the day, we're not policing ideologies. We don't get on one side or the other of this. This is around behavior for us, and so the behavior that we see in the videos and in the reporting of this is the very same behavior that we've seen in other cities, and it's not okay, and it's not okay in our city.
And the question that was asked by a couple of the businesses that I was at today is, maybe it's a stupid question, maybe it's a great question, I don't know, is why wasn't anybody arrested at the scene of the crimes at the time?
Yeah, that would have been ideal. I can tell you that the way this unfolded in terms of the timing of the officers coming on scene, the first officers did an excellent job, despite the fact that they didn't have some of the armor or some of the protective gear that would have been helpful for them. They did a really good job of being able to separate the combatants. By that point in time, there were individuals who were injured that required attention, and so that's where the initial efforts went to. I would have been very happy to see arrests made at the scene. I think there's a real deterrent effect to that, but I understand and support the decisions that were made around the priorities that were set and executed, and so that's fair enough. We'll deal with it after the fact.
So, Chief, does that mean arrests are pending? We heard from kind of on the weekend that there will be arrests, most likely. So, are charges pending at this point? Do you have any individuals identified that we could see charges made tonight or tomorrow?
No, I don't think you'll see it that quickly. We put together a task group today, an investigative group that will go after all of the offenses in relation to this. So again, I think it's really important that that we demonstrate that this is not okay in our city, and that the individuals who committed criminal offenses there in the parking lot be held to account for that. As the reports come in with respect to property damage and that type of thing, there will likely be more than we're even aware of now. So that's the work that will be done over the coming days. Yeah, so as of yesterday, the number of victims was 12 that were taken to area hospitals, and all of those, I believe, have been discharged. I don't think anybody has life-altering injuries, but certainly some of them were seriously injured at the time.
And were some, I just remember, like in the business community, or just people who were there not part of the actual event?
I believe at this point that anybody who was injured and who was taken to the hospital was involved in the conflict. No bystanders.
You mentioned those initial officers weren't necessarily had the right gear on or right protective equipment. Is there anything you would like to see changed maybe on how the response was initiated? I know resources were nearby at the time and resources were pulled across the city, but is there maybe something you would like to see change from the initial response so this maybe didn't escalate further?
Well, I think as a police chief, I'd always like to see prevention work. I'd like to see this not happen. I can tell you this was complicated by the fact that we were aware of 2 locations in the Northeast that were areas of interest for us. And I can tell you that the conflict actually turned out to happen at a 3rd location. So that was not an area that was known to us. And it was just a matter of the officers on bikes who were traveling between the 2 areas came across it. So whether that was a miscommunication, whether that was the police not being provided with information about one of the areas, that those are both possibilities. But when they came across the original conflict, it was in neither of the areas that they had been anticipating it, and much earlier than they would have been anticipating it.
Was any of the, you believe that these 2 groups had sort of predetermined that they were going to meet?
Well, I would say yes. You know, when you look at the video and you see that people have attended there with weapons, with sticks and clubs and hockey helmets and that type of thing, I would suggest that that something was premeditated there. It wasn't spontaneous.
Kind of like gangs, like, you know, street gangs, agree they're going to rumble at a certain point, that kind of thing.
Well, I think this is different. I think this is around political ideology. I think there's, again, very, very strong feelings on both sides of the community in relation to what's going on here. Yeah, I think the community could speak best to it if you're speaking to people from the community about what's happening and what belies this. But I think it's fairly clear to me that after what happened in Toronto and after what happened in Edmonton, that violence was pretty much a predetermined outcome here.
Where did the police hospitalize?
There were no police injured, thankfully.
Do you think, you are obviously condemning what happened, you're not calling it a protest, you're calling it a violent clash, you're even saying that it could be considered a riot. Do you think it would be useful, because in the past we have had protests in the city that have received condemnation from political leaders, local political leaders, actual protests, not riots. On this, we haven't heard of that except for the local councillor, who is also a member of the Calgary Police Commission. Do you think it would be useful for the larger community, for the community involved, but also for the larger community in Calgary, to hear from their political leaders a condemnation of what is, I think, probably the most serious event like this in my 30 plus years here? I mean, you're condemning it as a police chief, I understand that. You're the chief of police, I would expect nothing less. But would you think, especially when political leaders have condemned protests before, that have not led to bottles and hockey helmets, that they would come out, and wouldn't that reassure citizens, do you think?
It's an interesting question, I think, because again, this is a very much a politically driven bit of violence here. So I come out and I condemn it on the basis that in our streets, in our community, it just can't be, right? Like you can't say that because I'm frustrated with somebody else or we have different beliefs or whatever, that this can be okay. It simply can't be. And people on both sides will be held accountable for what they did. So we don't pick a right or wrong. In discussions with the community, I do appreciate how complex this issue is and how deeply emotional it is. So I think, you know, some of our political leaders and community leaders will probably engage the community around this and be able to tell some of those stories better than anybody can tell it on social media or print media.
They're not standing up and saying, we condemn the riot that happened on Saturday, period, full stop.
Yeah.
Signed, whatever politician you want to put in
Yeah.
there. Why, I mean,
I
a
don't-
lot of people in the Northeast were perplexed that I talked to that did not happen.
Yeah.
Why is the city not condemning this?
Yeah, I don't know about that, Rick. I
You
think,
are, but
well, I am based on behavioral reasons,
Yeah.
not ideology, right? And like I say, this becomes very complicated. And I think a lot of people are trying to better understand what happened here and what drove that within the Eritrean community. And so there may be people that come out and speak of it later once they understand better. But I think it is a very complex matter. And like I say, very emotional for the people involved. But at the end of the day, we just cannot have this in our city. It's that simple.
What assurance have you been given that this won't happen again? You mentioned earlier, you don't expect or anticipate this to happen, but what assurance have you been given that this won't happen?
Yeah, I would say the community wants to work with the police. I think the community is not, historically, has not been a violent community, and it's not been a community that's actually been sort of tied into this type of violence at this level in our community. So I don't think it's anything anybody wanted to see happen. I think it's something that has boiled over. And so hopefully it's hit its boiling point and there will be work that actually sort of takes down the temperature. We'll help the very best we can, but we're not going to overlook what happened on Saturday. Moving forward, we'll provide whatever help we can. I'm sure other leaders in the community will provide help and supports where we can. But at the end of the day, there's no justification for the behavior we saw. That was bananas.
What do you want to see from this investigation? Is this going to, 150, 200 people involved, is this going to be more of an educational thing, or are you hoping to see mass arrests and mass charges from all of this?
Well, I think with respect to the violence, like when we're talking about bringing, rocks and bricks and that type of thing and throwing them at other people and putting them in the hospital, I think there should be some serious repercussions for that. In terms of, I don't know the individuals involved, the backgrounds of the individuals involved who ended up breaking car windows or whatever. If people ended up paying those people back that incurred those costs, that might be totally fine. But I can tell you the violence involved here was very, very serious. And all you have to do is watch the video. And today, watching some of the video of the police officers involved through the body cams and stuff like that, this was, like I said, bananas. This is not something we can condone in our city, and the people that were involved in the worst of that should feel the wrath.
What is the estimated value of property damage?
Good question. I wouldn't have that off the top of my head, but we will have it once we sort of consolidate everything that came in that was in relation to this. We will have it, but I don't have that for you today.
The task force, what's it involved? Who's in it?
Mainly investigators, mainly GIU or General Investigative Unit investigators, and then some supplements to be able to go through all of the video, interview individuals who were hospitalized and that type of thing, and to go from there.
They've already started.
They've started.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.